Hey, I'm Christina, and this is Danielle. And our presentation today is going to start with an examination of the marriage between the creative and the scientist. And it's important because it's going to actually introduce the topic that we want to talk about today, and that is how to build a nicer machine. So a little bit about Danielle and I. We both joined Express Scripts, now part of Cigna, about 3 years ago. I think you have a little longer tenure than I do, because we were each looking for our own set of meaningful problems to solve. And there is no area, I tell you, that has more problems to solve than healthcare. And that is a challenge to anyone who is looking for problems. As we got started to know this space, what we witnessed is what I'm calling a palpable void of humanity. In the most basic exchanges, interactions, and experiences, there wasn't just something missing, there was actually nothing there. People are viewed as numbers, statistics, and parts of populations rather than individuals. The way information is presented is intimidating and confusing on a good day, and the voice of the healthcare provider is consistently condescending and clinical, or simply missing in and of itself. And to put a bow on it, the whole industry is behind on technology as an understatement.
And like Christina said, as a scientist, I'm used to thinking of people like trying to quantify behavior, but I was really struck by the way that people were looked at as part of the problem, as numbers, as statistics, as a problem to be corrected, rather than something to be embraced and designed as part of a holistic system.
Right. So as we started to unpack all these issues in the industry itself, we decided to create what we called this transformational experience by deliberately crossing the streams between what I do, creativity,
and what I do, social science.
And when we used this idea to build our new design system, something really started to emerge for both of us as truth. As technology professionals, we are too much in our own lanes, and our work is suffering. We hide behind our work, and we become too much like the machines that we're supposed to be commanding. From the creative side, what this has meant is that we become fixated on craftsmanship. Everybody talks about craftsmanship, but oftentimes we trade it for soul. And there may be a need to recapture what makes us creatives. And those things, I would say, the expression of passion, the ability to speak love through your work, and the necessity to create something beautiful, functional, and unique at the same time. Not one of those things, but all three.
And from a science perspective, we needed to look beyond the numbers, beyond the dashboards and analytics, to see the beating hearts, the belly buttons, the people that we are trying to serve, and see them as thinking, feeling human beings. And so, as we move beyond the silos of our science and think about the art and how empathy impacts that interaction, we really wanted to be systematic and apply that social science to be explored, tested, and in order to create a more human experience.
Right. So, not only would I argue that we as tech workers experience dehumanization, but it is making its way into the population. So let's do a little collective reflection on the fine line between the beauty of automation and being bossed by your machines. This is a gentle and very incomplete list of all the ways that I have surrendered my own personal responsibility for myself to machines. Machines tell me when to move my body, and as I was sitting in the keynote, my machine told me I was sitting too much. And in what way, right? So I need to walk faster, walk more. I didn't do enough. When and how to sleep. My sleep quality is terrible. Apparently, I'm failing on all fronts. When and what to eat, or mainly when to stop eating. And the machines actually bring me the food, right? I have a service that I get groceries from. The machines tell me what to do when I'm feeling bad, when I feel bad in my mind, when my body feels bad, and then exactly how to work off the food that the machines told me to eat or not eat and when they brought it to me. And I actually spend a lot of time trying to impress those machines. I spend way too much time trying to be perfect and prove it to something that I could have designed. But the truth is, the more that we use machines as agents for ourselves, the more opportunities we actually create as humans to stop thinking and to feel less. So this is the thesis question. As technology professionals, and more broadly as people, can we reclaim our humanity, become less like machines, and then build machines that are more like us? As technologists, there's deep responsibility in what we all do, and part of that responsibility lies in actually being authentically human. It's our job to build those machines, but our machines should actually be agents of care that we express outward. And in healthcare, that's extremely important, as we all know. To address this within our own team in digital experience at Express Scripts, we've developed a framework, and that's what we're going to walk you through today. It's a set of 10 things. They're basically guidelines and principles to recall and hopefully reverse the process of dehumanization and guide us towards building machines that actually care. So the first thing, first and foremost, number one, is find your purpose as a human, and this is not bullshit. If you think it's bullshit, then you don't actually have a purpose. And if you're not sure where to start, then I'll give you the model that we used. Start by defining your ethos, personally or within your team or community. The framework, again, that we used at Express Scripts is simple. We looked at who we are, what we believe in, and what we aspire to do, and the commonality that we all shared. And then we use that data to build a culture and to articulate a mission that everyone believes in and to keep it simple. Nothing is more destructive than creating a mission from some business goals that your boss told you that you have to fulfill. So create a mission that's timeless and unchanging, that's derived from your ethos. And just as an example, this is mine. This is mine personally. This is what I wanted to do when I decided to move into healthcare. I wanted to make someone's life better. So our mission is we build experiences that improve the lives of users, as simple as that, through any and every channel by which we have the opportunity to serve, period. If you have a mission that you believe in, derived from your very essence, your work will be filled with purpose. And if you care about your work, the work is better, and it's expressed with heart and infused with soul. So if you hate your job and you can't do this, I encourage you to find a new one so you can. The second one is to banish the word delight from your vocabulary. Cindy knows this about me. I hate that word. As a designer, delight is talked about as the holy grail of customer fulfillment, and it's rubbish. There is no one word that can actually serve to represent what satisfaction and fulfillment across technology should look like. So find a word that's actually meaningful and appropriate to your industry. Here are some examples of truthful alternates to delight. I want to build something meaningful. I want to build something useful, helpful, efficient. I want to be honest. I want it to be understandable. And third, this one seems like a no-brainer, but it's still a huge problem. It may even be worse than it was before, and that is to talk human. The language that we use inside of the applications that we build is so self-centered and exclusive, and there's nothing that will keep you from success with your customers more than speaking in a language that's not understandable, can't be understood, or is alienating or offensive. Language and second language, the ability to read and read at certain levels, how often we speak to people as if they're codes and numbers, the way that we speak and our diction, our word choice, how often we use industry jargon and try and elevate our own existence as nerds by speaking a lot of nerd language. Not to mention colloquialisms, regionalisms, and locale-specific exclusives. All of those are exclusives. There are many more things that we actually need to think about, and we have to think about them all, or we're not being fully human. Number 4, personalize, but only if you can do it right. So we talked a little bit about personalization in the keynote today, and that's a word that everyone talks about. It's almost like the word dashboard. It's like everybody is doing personalization and everybody has a dashboard. But if you can't personalize correctly, you're better off not doing it at all. And just for fun, here are some of the fun things that I get called or I see in applications on a regular basis that aren't my name. Member number, account number, and login, username, all of those things are not me, yet they're what I am identified with as at multiple companies. So that doesn't make me feel like there's trust, there's personalization that's meaningful. The name Tina, there is nothing to boil my blood more than anyone calling me Tina. So the fact that someone in an application calls me Tina means that their data is like from when I was in high school, or I did not input my own name. So that's doing it wrong. Shristina is my favorite of all time because that is clearly a mistype. Christina, though that name may exist. And then Christine and Christy are both just offensive bastardizations. And Carrie is my husband's name, yet I get called Carrie all the time. So doing it wrong. Personalize if you can do it right. And then for number 5, and I'm going to pass it to Danielle, is essentially, this is actually just an example of asking. If we want to do personalization the right way, we can still fill out forms and we can also ask. So the simplicity here is that we actually need to take the time to ask, and then we can make a form, a human exchange. And now number 5, remember what real life is like. Rarely, if ever, will your app be the center of someone's life. It's no offense to anyone's work. It's just not how we experience life, and you know it. The passage of time, of memory, of life events, happiness and pain, all of that is how we live life. It's in small moments and tiny pieces. And they're tiny fragments of space and time that meant something to us. Oftentimes it was who was there, what we felt, and why it was worth remembering. But like memory, the way that we actually experience everyday life is a series of little pieces of moments. I like to call them snacks. We spend many of our moments planning other moments, scheduling moments, and we try and create moments that will be committed to memory and beloved, but they're just little pieces in the continuum of time and fragments. So the best that you can do is to set a mission for yourself, like we talked about number 1. Articulate what you want to be able to gift someone through that word that means something, that's not delight, and give that moment to them that fulfills it, and that should be enough, that needs to be enough for you. If you think you're gonna change someone's life through your app, you may always be disappointed that you didn't or that you can't.
Okay, thank you. We'll do this elegant tango thing. So as you think about your place in other people's lives, the next point in the framework kind of seems intuitive. You have to burn your ego to the ground. And I don't say that lightly. This is something you actually have to take time and work at and do on a daily basis. Because it's not about your fame, your fortune, or even this expression of something you have built up inside of you that you want to put in the world. It's about doing a good job in service of someone else's needs. And if those needs don't resonate with you, at least on some level, you'll have a hard time getting your ego out of the way and delivering something that makes sense to your users. And the best advice I have to help you get there is something that is to kind of model a theme that underlies the scientific method. It's something that I have to work at on a daily basis, and we all have to practice. But essentially, stand up for your ideas, defend them, believe in them, explain them, but actively go out and look for data that refutes them. And if you find that data, be willing to change your mind. That's the only way your ego can be used in a way that can actually deliver a good user experience. And speaking of finding new data, number 7 is standing up for equality. Don't let old ways of thinking, of practice, old paradigms of organization keep you from creating a more inclusive world. You have this great opportunity in front of you. So there's tons of big examples of ways that technology does not make the world more inclusive. We heard about a lot of them in the keynote. In addition to that, there's algorithms that allocate policing according to old stereotypes. There's automation that doesn't work as well for different skin tones. Excuse me. But there's also other examples of separate experiences, separate websites for people that use assistive technology. Those are supposed to be equal, right? They often aren't. So we're here to remind you that even small gestures, like the way you design forms, can work to create more inclusivity. And instead of inferring on how someone wants to be addressed, like Christina mentioned earlier, just ask them, and then tell them why you need the data. It's their data, after all, their identity. And small gestures like being courteous enough to ask can help someone feel a sense of belonging and a sense of contextuality later in their interactions with your product. And speaking of old ideas, this is one that drives me bananas. So how many of you have filled out a survey or a form where they've asked your gender, male or female? Okay. That's always been wrong. Like, as a social scientist for 20 years, like, gender does not equate to male and female. It's a social construct. But the old way of labeling that binary choice was just to call it gender. But now we know, in a more modern world, that you don't want to have someone have to put themselves into that sort of binary classification for no reason at all. At Express Scripts, we've taken a slightly different approach because sometimes we do need to know biological sex. And so we label it accordingly so as not to confuse the issue, not to exclude people, and we also tell them why we need to know. And so when we talk about equality, we want to think about it that way. We're here to provide, Express Scripts especially, is here to provide health services to everyone equally. And so we want to have an expansive version of inclusivity. So when we think about people with different abilities, physical, mental, different levels of language and reading, like Christina mentioned, but also we want people to interact and we want to provide access without bias for gender, sex, race, orientation, preference, and identity, or language, literacy, or economy. What we're talking about really is inclusion. And how can we be inclusive of humanity without thinking about how humans feel? So this is what I think of as one of the fun ones. So it's not a new question, right? If you think about fiction, science fiction, movies, television, folks have always wondered, will machines actually be like us one day? They never will be like us if we don't actually consider the emotions that people feel when interacting with anything. So the simplest way to do this, and one method that we've adopted at Express Scripts, is to apply a tool from design thinking. Is to sit down and actually think and write down what the way you want people to think, what you want them to say, what you want them to do, and what you want them to actually feel when they interact with your technology. It's a very simple tool, but it helps to get you out of your own mindset and think about the other person and actually define who that other user is. And beyond that, thinking about emotions, we can ask for deeper feedback as a core part of what we do. So we in this room, we have a lot of ways of expressing emotions. I mean, I was actually having a pretty intense text conversation with my aunt about her husband who's in surgery. But I can't imagine 10, 15 years ago doing that over text with emojis. But we did, and we do, every day. So don't be shy about collecting feedback from people about how they feel rather than just assuming. And use different ways of collecting that feedback because the way we express our emotions evolve. Emotions themselves are transient feelings. So how you feel about sharing that will change as well. So be open to feedback and be nimble about how you use different micro languages to collect that feedback. All right, so now once you start to think about how people feel, and you're ready really to take the next step and actually go talk to people and humanize your data. So what I strongly, strongly recommend is going out and talking to people so that you add a layer of rich qualitative, survey, small sample quantitative, on top of the more the more shallow but large data sets you have. At Express Scripts, we've done this by looking at our segments, the segments that we have based on human behavior and certain other characteristics, and going out, doing interviews with folks who actually represent those segments, doing some survey work as well, to then create personas. And what those personas do is to help tell a story and bring a specific part of our member population, for a technical term, to life. Help our product managers, help our developers, help our designers see a real person behind a cluster of data. And this is an example of a consumer. We're in a sort of a consumer technology. But I've done this work before in other industries, and even if you're designing something for other data scientists, they aren't like you. Get out of the building, go and talk to them, and understand the humans that you're designing things for. Because the goal is to marry real lives with what we're building, to bring some depth and humanity to the data. Because, after all, even though machines may be telling us what to do all the time, they actually work for us. We don't work for them. And I believe that we're all here crowded into this room because we believe that one day we will get to a place where we hire machines that do things that humans aren't that good at, but it works really well together. And we're able to step back and kind of marvel at the things that may come out of that really elegant collaboration. All right, Christina.
So just to bring it all home, there are two basic holes of this thesis, right? The creativity and the science portion and the elegant marriage of that. But it boils down to us essentially acknowledging that we need to recapture our humanity and then teaching the robots well. So again, we present this framework, how to build a nicer machine, and we'd love to take questions.
All right.
I think
Questions over here?
oh, there's one over here.
Okay.
We only have 3 microphones.
So my question is, obviously you guys have done a lot of work, right, to think about the human interaction. What are some examples or what's your guys' process to make sure that actually gets into the build phase, right, and like actually gets productized, right? Because it seems like it's really easy to have on a storyboard or something like that as you're planning, but it's really hard to get to build.
I think we'll both answer this because her answer is going to be different than my answer. So I'm going to be totally honest with you. As a creative and as someone who's been a designer for over 20 years, I pride myself on being a weirdo with our teams. And I almost work on forcing people out of their comfort zone and getting into creative zones. So that puts them in this place where they're more open to ideas and they're more willing to understand the human side of the work that we do. So I do a lot of and again, Cindy knows this, forced yoga. It's a thing. We do creative visualization exercises. I like harp music. I play harp music for groups of developers, and I really try and get them somewhere where they're completely uncomfortable, and all of a sudden they're willing to listen to talk about feelings. We've also put a lot of work into this persona work, which I suspect that Danielle will want to tell you about. So that's another way that we kind of systematically show you, and our personas are different because they're data-driven. So before I spoil it, I'll let Danielle finish the answer.
Yep, so my answer is going to be a little different. We do have these personas that we've worked really hard to build and socialize. And then tactically, we work hand in hand with our technical product teams. Like, we have a couple of folks in the audience now that we host design thinking workshops in the beginning of a process to help folks identify the personas and see how they relate to the work on a more tactical level. We also do usability testing and early concepts, and then later we monitor how the feedback that we get from the field and roll it back. So we are part of the system, part of the process, and work alongside with our development teams.
So rattle the cages and then have something scientific that you can back it up with.
I was wondering if you could talk about where you think healthcare data is today in terms of your ability to pursue these goals on more of a project level. Do you think you have access to the data that you need to start building projects that are helping you find things that can help people increase healthcare access, or are there still barriers that you see to that?
All of the above.
No. So it took 3 years, to be perfectly honest, to be able to join enough tables together to be able to build these personas. To get access to, because we protect, if any of you are Express Scripts members, your data is so safe that we can't even get to it. But HIPAA compliance, PHI, data security are something that we take really seriously. And these systems and methods of to use data that's de-identified or otherwise protected aren't that mature. So we do have a hard time getting the data that we need. But we do have a really good relationship now with our security teams know what we're trying to do. They don't think we're crazy anymore. Same thing with legal and compliance. So we do get to work hand in hand to get to a solution. But these things do take a lot longer, honestly, in healthcare because of those barriers, I believe.
And I'll just add on to that. In the industry itself, what I've observed in just my tenure with Express Scripts is that these words, these technologies, even in recognition of a conference like this, the industry is catching up. If you had spoken about when you had spoken about big data 3 years ago, only 20% of your population knew what you were talking about at all. So the industry is actually kind of rapidly catching up at a pace that makes it more accessible, more realistic for us to pursue work like this.
Many of us have tried to implement different frameworks, technologies in our businesses. What were the biggest challenges you two faced in implementing the framework that you outlined for us?
It sounds like a lie, but we didn't have a lot of pushback. And that wasn't what I expected. And I do think that a lot of the freedom that we've had to actually pursue something like this is rooted in the fact that the industry is broken and everyone who's working in the industry acknowledges it and they are desperate for solutions. So when we came in, I expected to have a war on my hands, to try and get certain things laid down. We were mainly concerned about the ability to create design foundations inside of a company who didn't necessarily have that as the way that we practiced the craft before, right? And the industry reflects that on a whole. But what we found is great success and this idea that it is a major problem that we need to solve. Everyone's life in the country and in the world will benefit for it when we do, and we gotta essentially bring all of the gifts that we all have to the table in order to do it. So it's been unique in that way.
And I definitely agree with what Christina said. So I'll take a slightly different approach to answering your question. I think the technology has actually been our biggest challenge because of the things I mentioned before and sort of the legacy. It's a large enterprise, so we have lots of older technologies that kind of rear their heads in surprising ways. And so it's trying to push past that has been the biggest challenge in kind of being able to run with this, or run faster with this.
You mentioned it in one of your slides, but I was wondering if you could maybe give a few specific examples about how your team addresses challenges with health literacy. I think it's a big problem in seeing health-related software. I think people either ignore or forget about that sometimes.
Yeah. I'll start. Because from my perspective, we test, and test again. I mean, we've started doing kind of baselining with health literacy questionnaires to help to simplify our language. But then before we launch things, we test letters, we test emails, we test interface, just to make sure people are understanding it.
And the way that our team is structured, we have these core teams that kind of work on very specific product areas, and then we have horizontal disciplines that service all of those teams. And we have a health literacy expert on staff who essentially provides guidance and a consultation to the content work that gets produced by those teams. So we kind of have that ingrained in the work that we do. That's just something that we consider. It's part of what we do, and it's something that we always check for, double check for, and then test, right? So it's like revision and iteration and testing.
I will add that I don't want folks to feel like that we are a large enterprise with a lot of resources, so you can't really do all the testing. There are lots of low-cost ways to test the language you use. And I mean, we started really simple on a shoestring budget to prove ourselves, and we did a lot of SurveyMonkey, Mechanical Turk, surveys that would end up costing $10 with 50, 60 people. So
the other point is that the literacy expert is also a writer, and it's one person. So,
About number three. Number three, the range of things that you were talking about doing seemed really ambitious. How do you do that in-house? What's your approach to that? Do you have somebody outside doing that?
yeah, similar to the model that I just mentioned, we have experts that are looking at general accessibility for all things, and language is included in that. So we do all of that work in-house. We seek training when we need to get training to bring it in-house, but we do all of it with the model that I just mentioned. You know, we have these folks that have a skill and a craft that they practice, and then they have like their secret superpower that they give to the group, and consultancy that goes across those teams that are looking at dedicated product areas. Did you want to say something?
I will say that we aren't equally good at all of those things that we listed. Like we are, it's part of our growth and our framework too. And I will just put it out there that we are not as good as we should be in other languages, but we are working on it.
Hi, you mentioned that you have big data, you have thick data, you have personas. So can you give some examples of where you're using the thick data on top of, and the personas on top of the big data to change what you're doing in terms of what the experience is for the member?
Okay. I have a really basic, older example, but it's one of my favorites. So years ago, we've been there 3 years, so it's like 2 years ago. We redesigned the website. We did a lot of, looking at clickstream data, the clickstream data that we had, and we did some surveys to look at information architecture designs, like what card sorts, what people think should go where, and we launched the website. We started to see one-off comments coming through the feedback complaining that people couldn't find the logout button. When we did all our testing, nobody really used it. But once we sat down and read all those comments, we discovered another use case that we missed. There's a case where, 2 people in one household use the same computer to access their benefits. They don't have their benefits tied necessarily, but one person has to log out, the other person has to log in. And we didn't consider that. And that was something that just wasn't visible in the data that we had, but it was visible when we looked at the comments.
And I'll just speak to your question, I think, from a broader perspective, looking at design systems. We talked a little bit in the keynote today and in the panel about how there really isn't a way to effectively interpret a lot of these large data sets. And so you have the data, but you can't do anything with it because you don't really know what it says. So what we've spent a lot of time on most recently is this idea that we need to invent something from a data visualization perspective. I feel like the data viz industry area focus stagnated once there was something to look at. And I think we really need to bring creativity to data visualization in and of itself and invent something new, because there today isn't anything that, in my opinion, is highly usable and highly understandable, even at first glance. So can we, as a challenge, invent something that takes data visualization and the ability to interpret it more easily and more efficiently on first sight up a level?
I just wanted to follow up on that point because I love visualizations, and they're great, but at the same point in time, for those of us that are in, this level of data scientists and such and stuff like that, what we perceive as useful is much different than what maybe the people are going to be using. And while we can come up with these phenomenal ideas for visualizations, they, unfortunately, as you increase the level of sophistication, a lot of people are challenged with a bar chart and a line chart.
Yeah.
And
You're magnetic.
Maybe? Okay. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, no, I totally
I feel
acknowledge
the
that,
same
right?
way.
I acknowledge that, but I also think that's where we can get creative with specialization. We can create niche, interpretive, visual segments. And that's one area where I think it would be interesting to explore, right? You could create industry-specific or even audience-specific visualization sets that would increase comprehension and usability, but totally heard and agree that not everyone is at the same level, and one man's number is another man's confusion. So I acknowledge that.
I applaud what you're doing. I like your curiosity and the exuberance, and it makes a whole lot of sense. After that, what are the benefits to the enterprise, to the organization? I can only sit here and nod affirmatively of where you're going with this marriage between creative and science. I mean, I want to hug both of you, but I can't.
Later.
Right, not even later.
In the mind.
But I ask you two questions about what does it mean for the enterprise. There was no case studies in terms of driving greater therapy adherence because of this approach, or some of the tactical things you must do as a PBM. Secondly, I'm curious, is this enough of a differentiator where you wear it on your sleeve with new clients and you can say, this approach is unique, it's ours, and getting credit in the marketplace from a marketing perspective? So one is it moving the needle on key metrics, key clinical metrics, key behavioral metrics?
Yeah.
And secondly, are you bragging about it externally?
Yep.
I think it's important to note that Larry Zarin is the former chief marketing officer.
Yes. We met him. we met him.
Okay.
Okay, so
I'm sorry.
Yeah, a couple things.
I have no interest in this organization.
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, I think two big takeaways. One is happier employees and better experiences. Now, how do we prove exactly how the experience is better? Ask me next year. This is something that's kind of brand new, and we're presently figuring out how to essentially create the return, right? Like how to articulate it, how to measure it, what it is, and what the question that you're asking, how that translates to a business person. And that's hard to do, but we're working on it. So ask me next year. But I think the happier employee thing is something that I want to point out, right? Like the whole part of number one that means something is that if you have a purpose that you believe in and your work is driven with passion, the work is better. And if you work better, what you deliver to your customers is better, and they experience something better. So all of it is this idea of progressive movement forward, but it's not just for the people that we serve, it's for ourselves as well. So to me, and then you had another question. Oh, the clients, yes, we are tooting that horn big time. And it's not because we're saying, well, and this is how much money we're making because of it, but because we're purpose-driven, we're proud of it. So it is something that I think is seen as a differentiator, and we are, again, like I like to be the resident weirdo, so they bring me in and I play harp music and talk about this.
Yeah. And even though, to Christina's point, we haven't had this in place long enough to have this measurement framework to model the impact on the bottom line, our clients do care. They want to know about it. They want to know what we're doing about it. We get more and more questions early on in early stages of negotiations about what's our system, what's our user experience, how do we measure our user experience, how do we respond to it, how do we change it, and I hate to say it, but we also have the stick. So accessibility is part of this framework, and accessibility is the law. And so we are doing we do have that stick of avoidance of compliance issues.
As we wrap up, thank you so much to Christina and Danielle. You have really given us a lot to think about. And we appreciate you trailblazing. And we look forward to next year, because it sounds like you're going to be a little agile, and we'll see where we are then. Thank you.